Welcome to the 1980s, a totally righteous time of progression, self-expression, and most importantly, shooting for the stars. Now, the 1980s contained a plethora of different events that shaped the world we live in today, ranging from topics from science fiction in television and movies, all the way to economics in the United States. However, a handful of these events are on display in this very mural that you're looking at right now. This mural covers topics that greatly impacted the world we live in today. And in order for that effect to be understood, you must sit back and relax and enjoy the ride of the 1980s.
In the center of our piece is the Millennium Falcon, the spacecraft from the film trilogy Star Wars. The Millennium Falcon became a symbol of Star Wars and the type of film that it ushered in. Star Wars was born out of the gritty filmscape of the 1970s, with blood and gore galore. George Lucas's film subverted those film ideas with the success of his film. He proved that strong, wholesome characters and a well-crafted story could be used to make a hugely successful family-friendly film. The story of the Skywalkers introduced a whole new generation to a new type of science fiction. Another place you can see science fiction on the big screen in our mural is Doc Brown's Silver DeLorean. This is the car from the Back to the Future trilogy, in which Marty McFly, the main character, is stuck in 1955 and has to return to 1985 with the help of a younger Doc Brown.
Calculations are correct. When this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're gonna see some serious shit.
Directed by Steven Spielberg, who directed many iconic films of the 80s, Back to the Future captures audiences' imaginations by reliving the 50s and comparing how American culture changed till the 80s. Films, however, weren't the only product that captured the public's attention. Hungarian sculptor and architecture professor Erno Rubik invented a puzzle cube in which each face could be moved up, down, left, or right. Originally called the Magic Cube, it was renamed Rubik's Cube when it was sold to the West. Hitting U.S. shelves in the summer of 1980, the puzzle stumped thousands. In a pre-internet age, any and all information was passed word of mouth, with any solution being gobbled up by the public. This led to a cube craze from 1980 to 1982.
If you look into the top, you'll notice that the moon has E.T.'s face on it. This was put here because Steven Spielberg's movie E.T. was one of the most influential movies of the 80s. This was the first sci-fi movie to show aliens not as bloodthirsty creatures, but that they can also be friendly.
E.T. home phone.
E.T. phone home. E.T. phone home.
This was revolutionary to the sci-fi genre. This movie surpassed Star Wars to become the highest grossing movie of its time. You'll also notice the kit car. There's a huge boom for kit cars in the 80s. One of the biggest manufacturers of that time for the kit cars was a company known as Dutton. They made the sporting Phaeton and came up with the Melos.
Knight Rider, a shadowy flight into the dangerous world of a man who does not exist.
You'll also notice the American flag on the car. There's a new patriotism in the 80s. For example, the Rambo franchise Top Gun, The Right Stuff, Chuck Norris films, and Clint Eastwood's and Arnold Schwarzenegger films. All those help bring around the new patriotism that arose in the 80s.
Located at the bottom left of the mural is one of the decade's most devastating events, the explosion of the NASA space shuttle, the Challenger. According to History.com, on January 28, 1986, just 73 seconds after liftoff, the disaster claimed the lives of all 7 astronauts on board.
We're awaiting word. They're holding their breath just, I'm sure, as everyone else is. You saw it just a few moments ago, about 45 seconds after liftoff, a huge fireball in the sky.
We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded. Flight director confirms that. We are out looking at checking with the recovery forces to see what can be done at this point.
Unfortunately, the shuttle never made it to space, which is why we have it painted very close to the Earth. One of the crew members was Kristen McAuliffe, who would have been the first civilian in space. The reason for the explosion was pointed to 2 rubber O-rings which had been designed to seal the sections of the rocket booster, which had failed due to cold temperatures on the morning of the launch. This event drew national attention and prompted the halt of space mission. From where the Challenger took off from was Florida in the United States. During the 80s, the U.S. was going through a period of economic growth after a recession in 1983. This meant that, according to Matt Muffett of ThoughtCode.com, the economy had rebounded and enjoyed a sustained period of growth as the annual inflation rate stayed below 5% for the remainder of the 1980s. This was because of new policies implemented by President Ronald Reagan's administration, and this caused economic prosperity for many in the United States. As you can see, a portion of the Berlin Wall in the bottom left is painted to resemble a piano. This is supposed to be a reference to the synthesizer and the new wave. The synthesizer, more commonly known as the synth, was a revolutionary instrument that changed music in the 80s, bringing a lasting development in electronic music production.
If you draw your attention to the lower right-hand corner of the mural, you will see 2 components that represent 2 significant events of the 1980s. The first is the Berlin Wall. Constructed in 1961, the Berlin Wall divided Germany with the purpose of keeping so-called Western fascists out of the socialist East Germany. In the 1980s, the idea of keeping this wall standing was heavily supported by Gorbachev, the former and last Secretary General of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. At the time, the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, was heavily against the idea of having a wall separating Germany, viewing it as a severe form of division.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
The wall was eventually torn down in 1989, which could be argued to be the mark of the fall of the USSR. Now, if you shift your attention onto the other component in this section, you will see the Live Aid Musical Festival logo in the place of the continent of Africa. Live Aid was a fundraising music concert that took place in 1985. All money raised was donated as relief to support the ongoing famine in large portions of Africa. Performers included Queen, Elton John, Madonna, and 72 other acts. The concert raised over $127 million, not only making it one of the most successful fundraising events of all time, but also one of the most well-known music concerts of all time.
Now here is an explanation of the artistic design. We chose to paint the Earth, Moon, and space to encapsulate the 1980s. By using the neon lights shooting up from the Earth, we show the different colors that were popular during the decade. The medium that we used was paint, and in space we used the splatter method to make stars. In our mural, each horizontal third contains different components. The bottom, with the Earth, contains mostly political events. The middle, in space, contains pop culture references, and the top with the Moon contains culture phenomena. Thank you so much for listening.